we are finally in Unit 5. And this unit, keep in mind there is no final exam for Anatomy and Physiology 1. There is just the last test going over human reproduction, respiration, human reproduction, and development genetics. We've already gone over respiration. We're in the last chapter, essentially, which is really 2 chapters smushed together. So human anatomy, sex, right? That's what we all been waiting for, right? Wow, chicka, chicka, wow, wow. All right. So, for reproduction. All right. So I'm going to do 2 lectures for reproduction. First lecture, what I'm going to go through is how the organs form, and then go over the gross anatomy of the male. Then the second one, I'm going to go over the gross anatomy of the female anatomy, and then ending on a high note with the menstrual cycle. The third lecture in this series is going over the basics of genetics, kind of as a brush up for you on how to do Punnett squares, so you're not caught with your pants down around your ankles on the test. All right. So keep in mind, reproduction, sex. What's it used for? Well, it's used to actually create more of your own kind. That's the main purpose of it. Now, you do understand that in this we're going to have what we call major structures and accessory structures. Now, the major structures, again, I'm going to follow the outline that I posted on Canvas, so I'll just look down every now and then to make sure I'm not going too far off the beaten path. All right, so we're going to have gonads, ducts, and accessory glands. The gonads. Keep in mind, the gonad is going to be where the male or female will generate the sex cells. It will also be then where they would also generate their primary sexual hormone. As you know, for the male, it's the testis, hence why it's called a testis, because it produces testosterone, but it also does spermatogenesis. For the female, it's going to be her ovary, which is oogenesis, which is the maturation and release of an immature egg. And then she's going to form, the major hormone is going to be estradiols, collectively called estrogen. It's about 6 different hormones that they call collectively estrogen. Later on in her menstrual cycle, which we'll talk about in the next lecture, is going to be progesterone. That's another major one. Now understand, even though a male predominantly makes testosterone, female predominantly makes estrogen, the adrenal glands on top of your kidneys will create the contrasting hormone of your sex in low amounts. So therefore you got both. Now people always think what these hormones do is always, say for the male, what does testosterone do? Well, it's larger, basically more bone mass, larger muscle mass, deeper voice, the puberty thing, the Adam's apple, making pubic hair, axillary hair, things like that. For the female, estrogen, softer features, wider hips, breast production, and then obviously, the menstrual cycle. But these hormones do other things besides just that. They help to balance electrolytes in your body. They help to drive cell cycles in your body for repair and for reproduction, plus other odds and ends. So it's not just one thing that they do. They do lots of things. Now, if you remember, back when we went over way back in the review, I said that your sex hormones derive from a parent compound called androgen. Androgens it's a parent hormone that once you modify the structure, you move some functional groups around, you make it fold a different way, you can either make testosterone, estrogen, or progesterone. So the parent of all sex hormones is a parent compound called androgen. So whenever you hear me say anything about an androgen receptor, generically that means a sex hormone receptor type of thing. All right, but those are the gonads. Now, when I have in there like the accessory sex organs, those are going to be the things that form after that primary organ is formed, and they're formed as a function of having that organ, meaning this. For a female, hopefully you understand you are XX. To be a male, you are XY. That's what's going to create either ovary or testis. All the other plumbing that derives afterwards is a direct function of having that organ first. So which one you get, testis or gonad, is XX or XY. Then the other supporting cast comes later, and that's independent of genetics. Because hopefully you understand that in your makeup you can essentially create both, which is again one of the little wonders of nature. All right, so Let's see, moving on down. I already went over that. I talked about with you before what a chromosome is. It's one individual DNA molecule with its associated proteins. You are human, Homo sapien, therefore you have 46 chromosomes. Another way to say that, you have 23 pairs of homologous chromosomes, similar, not identical. 22 of them are called autosomes. Auto means self, meaning between a male and a female, it's essentially the same recipes in the same locations. Then you have your sex chromosomes. Sex chromosomes are the last pair, and as you know, XX female, XY male. All right, so going on down then, let's talk about how you became a boy or a girl. All right, so let's see. Your mom and dad, sorry to break it to you, had sex. That's why you're here, all right? I know it's something you don't want to think about. Maybe there was some dancing, you know, a nice movie, maybe a dinner, you know, it just wasn't, you know, too... Never mind, I'm going off the trail, so I'm going to stop myself there. I'm tired and I go in idiot ranges. All right, so anyway, they have sex. Now, understand then, you're fertilized in the distal third of mommy's fallopian tube, also known as her oviduct or uterine tube. That's in the upper part of it, which I'll talk about in the next lecture. All right, so it's eventually going to, the pre-U becomes fertilized, will travel down the fallopian tube. It's going to take roughly about 50 or so hours till eventually you enter mommy's uterus. Then eventually you'll implant in the back of mommy's uterus between the fallopian tubes in an area called the fundus. Not a big deal. I'll talk about that next lecture. All right. So at this point now, let's jump 6 weeks forward. Okay, so you're 6 weeks of age. Understand at this point right now, you're neither male nor female physically. Genetically you are, but physically no. At that point, roughly about 6 weeks in, if, let's say, the developing mass of cells embryo is supposed to be a male, well, understand he has a Y chromosome. So, at this point, prior to that, two ducts are going to form. One is called a mesonephric duct, also known as the Wolffian duct, and then we have the paramesonephric duct called the Muellerine duct. Why do I mention this? Again, this is all just coffee talk, going over stuff, nothing you're liable for any sort of exam. Well, the Wolffian duct, also known as the mesonephric duct, basically you have to understand in the early embryo off the pre-kidneys, little buds are going to form on the medial surface. Now those are going to be testes or ovaries, depends upon what forms, okay? At that point, they have two ducts. The Wolffian duct, the mesonephric duct, is what's going to be retained and what's going to form the male traits, meaning the testis and everything else and all the other things added to it. The paramesonephric duct, para meaning next to, also known as the Muellerine duct, would then be where the female material is going to be formed from, okay? But at that point, you got both. The embryo has to decide which one's going to keep, which one's going to lose. All right, so 6 weeks in, on the Y chromosome, a region of the Y chromosome is called an SRY region, which stands for the sex-determining region on the Y chromosome. At that point, the genes turn on and it starts emitting proteins, which creates something called TDF, testis determining factor. What does that do? Testes start to form. Okay, great. Now, roughly then, if we jump 2 weeks ahead of time, meaning from 6 weeks it's activated, 2 more weeks later, 8 weeks in, the TDF is now actually, you can actually see microscopically testes form. They're like little, and I mean little tiny grains of sand. Well, at that point, what do they give off? They give off testosterone. That's what they're supposed to do. But more importantly, they give off a hormone called MIF, Muellerine inhibiting factor. What does Muellerine inhibiting factor does? It causes the degradation and destruction of the paramesonephric duct, the Muellerine duct, meaning that any chance of being a female is closed and you're going down to boyland. Okay? If, however, this determining region, let's just say the individual is XY and the genetics kicks in too late, well, what'll happen? By default, start making female traits. It can kick back in later, but that means then be hermaphroditic. But understand, human physiology, your anatomy, by default, you're female. It's only if you have the Y chromosome, which then you destroy the ability to go female, and then you go down the male route. Okay, so if it doesn't activate at that time, then therefore the paramesonephric duct, the Muellerine duct, starts to go into action. If it kicks in late, like I said, then you get dual sexes. You get hermaphrodism. All right, so with that then, let's see. Jump down. All right, so let's assume everything's going well. All right, so at this point now, let's just say it's going to be a boy, XY. All right, so the Mullerian duct is gone. The Wolffian duct is forming. So what's going to happen at this point? If you were to look at it on a gross microscopic level, you still wouldn't be able to tell if it's a boy or a girl. Basically, between the legs, you'd have a little nub, a little bud. Well, it depends. Is that little nub going to elongate to form a penis or be reabsorbed back in to become a clitoris? It depends. At that same time, it looks the same. Now, understand, a lot of the tissues I'm going to go over, they're the same tissues in the embryo. It's just a matter of going to be how do you form it and develop it at a later time. Are you going to fashion a penis, or are you going to fashion a clitoris and a vaginal orifice? Which way are we going to go here? At that point, that's all done with, again, hormones and chemical cues. All right, so let's say it's going to be a boy. That little bump, again, it's going to be called the genital tubercle. That little bump is going to form the glans penis, which is the head of the penis, the little mushroom cap looking thing, or the clitoris of the female. Now, people have a tough time understanding this, but if you actually look anatomically at the shape of the clitoris of the female, it looks like a miniaturized penis. It has the little mushroom cap and it has a shaft, but women, you don't understand that, because let's say you become sexually aroused, the clitoris becomes engorged. The only thing you'll see is the top part. The rest of it's actually embedded into you. It's the same anatomy is what I'm telling you. It's just a matter of did it get absorbed or did it get extended? Same thing. So the glans penis and the clitoris in the female do the same thing. They respond to sexual stimulation. Same tissue, just a matter of what happened. All right. Now, the next thing you look at is going to be called the urogenital folds. Okay? The urogenital folds, basically, if it's a male, the male, then you have a glans, and you're going to have to form the shaft of the penis. So how does that happen? The folds have to actually form around to create a cylinder, and that's what creates the shaft. Great. In the female, that doesn't form. The urethral folds remain open, and that's what's going to become the labia minora of the female, the innermost folds of her external genitalia. Fine. Then we have what's called the labioscrotal swelling. If it's a male, the labioscrotal swelling will distend as an abdominal pouch from the abdomen, and the testes will sit in it, the scrotum. Fine. Female, no. Instead, what will happen is instead of forming a pouch, it'll remain open, and that will become her labia majora. So notice, same tissues, just a matter of what happens. In the male, glans penis. Same thing as the clitoris in the female. Okay? When you look at the urogenital folds, you either make the shaft in the male or the labia minora in the female. For the labioscrotal swelling, you either make the scrotum in the male or the labia majora in the female. It's the same tissue, it's just a matter of how it was fashioned. Okay? The other stuff is going to be the same. You see there that I have there like the urethral groove, the urethral sinus. The groove is what's going to make the urethra from your bladder to the outside world. The sinus is the hole to the outside world so you can go pee-pee. The perineum is the tissue connecting your external genitalia to your anus, and then you have your anal orifice. All that's normal tissue plumbing between both sexes. All right, so let's go say now we're back to the male again. All right, so the male, let's just say again, as you're approaching birth, understand those little nubs are on the inside of your pre-kidneys. Well, understand in both male and female, they can't stay there. They have to basically go through predetermined apoptosis, cell death, and think of it almost like a spider coming down on a thread. They're actually going to come down off the kidneys and go down into the pelvic cavity. Now, if all they go is the pelvic cavity, ovary, okay? However, if it's a male, they're going to have to go over the pubic symphysis, through the inguinal orifice, and into the actual scrotum itself. All that is going on a small little cord called one of two names. Either the spermatic cord, that one's boring. The better one is called the gubernaculum. That one's just fun to say. But anyway, all that is just the vessels, the tissues, and the nerves that are allowing it to distend down in. Now, that should happen in the male, hopefully by 7th month it should happen. Okay, so basically they should be nestled where they're supposed to be. Gentlemen, for you, understand this is how you can get an inguinal hernia, because in order for that to happen, it has to pass through a sinus to get in, which is quite large. Example, A male goes out for sports one day and he has to get a physical. What do? They check for a hernia. Sure, you've always heard the old thing, well, the guy's in front of you, you turn your head and cough as he's holding your testes. Well, there's a reason for that, understand. If the gubernaculum is attached, meaning it's attached to the lower abdominal muscle walls, because it's actually physically attached to it, when the male turns his head and he coughs, goes, it tenses, and the testes and the scrotum should rise up and fall. That means that the gubernaculum is still attached. You're good. You're healthy. If, however, you do that and they don't rise and fall, that means that it became detached. That means you have an inguinal hernia. That means you're not going out for sports. That means you're going for abdominal surgery because you could rip the entire lower abdominal walls off of your abdominal wall cavity. No. So therefore, that's what that whole thing is. Now, ladies, you can also get an inguinal hernia, but your chance of getting it is very, very, very small because the orifice is that much smaller and it's not as prolific. All right, so then now the testes have dropped down in. Okay, so now that we have male or female, I've gone over that. All right, now 2 words I have in here now. I'm sure you've already droned out on what I've been talking about, but now wakey wakey, big star. You see critochidism and androgen sensitivity. Critochidism, crito means cryptic. Chidism means that the testes fail to distend down into the abdominal cavity and into the testis, into the scrotum themselves. One factor that can happen for that big star is called androgen sensitivity. In this case now it's a genetic disorder where the individual is XY. The testes are working, they're giving off testosterone. The problem is this. Because of the faulty recipes of genetics, the individual is lacking proper androgen receptors. So basically his testes are screaming at him, you're a boy, but none of the other tissues can listen to it, so therefore the testes remain in the abdominal cavity. This person is usually misdiagnosed kind of like as a female, again, because again at this point the external genitalia can either look like a small penis or an enlarged clitoris, so it becomes almost ambiguous. But then the female starts to complain of massive abdominal cramping, 9, 10 years of age. They think, oh, it's just their first menstrual cycle. Then they go in, they do a wet x-ray, they do maybe an MRI, whatever, and they notice 2 small fuzzy shadows on the inside of the kidneys. Those are his testes, and they never descended. Why is he getting abdominal pain? Because they're starting to necrose. They're rotting inside of him, which means they have to remove them. And this is now whenever you see this in your doctor shows, why it's during sweeps week, because the kid is well below the age of consent, 18 or whatever, 16, whatever it is. And they have to do this to save the child's life, but they have to do it through the parents. Then the parents, they're relying on the parents to tell the kid what the heck's going on with the kid. And that's where the whole drama occurs in the doctor show and blah, blah, blah. But it happens more often than you think it does. If I remember right, the statistics, it's 1 in every, for some reason, 27 male births, quote male births, I think is what it was, if I remember right. Anyway, now let's go to the male's anatomy. Now understand, when I go through this, I'm going to go through the gross anatomy, and I'm also going to go through the histology. The histology that you are liable for is going to be on pages, let's see, 158, 159. If I remember, I will put these pictures up on Canvas for you so you can see them a little better or zoom in on them, but they are in the notebook as well, lab notebook. Just remind me if I forget, because I will forget, because I got a lot going on, which I'm sure you do too. All right, so scrotum. What's the scrotum? Scrotum is a cutaneous outpouching of the abdominal wall with the testes sit within. Well, first off, why is that crucial? The human anatomy for the male is set up just badly. Why? For the testes to work properly, in other words, for them to do spermatogenesis, for the creation and maturation of sperm, that has to occur around 34 to 35 degrees Celsius. Problem: human body core temperature is 37 degrees Celsius, so the body is already too hot, and therefore his own body heat would sterilize his own testes. So basically, how do you fix this? You hang the testes outside the body in this cutaneous sac that you can either raise or lower depending upon temperature changes, okay? The whole goal is to keep them right around the rosy temperature, around 34, 35 degrees Celsius. So think, gentlemen, if you go into a cold body of water, what happens? The scrotum will contract, pulling the testes into you, meaning the outside environment is not between 34 and 35, and it brings them closer to warm them. If it's too warm, what does the scrotum do? It relaxes, pulling it away from the body so they stay cooler and not warmed by your body, keeping them around 34, 35 degrees Celsius to retain their function. All right, now, in case you don't know this, testes do not fall in the same area. The left testis is usually higher than the right. Why is that? So when a male sits, they don't go clang, because that would hurt and not be good. So the left one will slide above the right one and therefore prevents compressive damage. Now, for the scrotum, number one, big star, know what it is. It's the cutaneous outpouching. I'm trying to be politically correct, not go down again. So anyway, understand its job. Keeps the testes at a normal temperature, like I said, cooler than the core temperature of a human. Two things majorly are going to control this. Big, huge star. The first one is called the cremaster muscle. You'll see it in the notes. The cremaster muscle is the one that will contract based upon cold. So therefore, that's the one that will actually take the scrotum and pull on it. So it's the outcropping of the abdominal wall, and it'll actually pull on it to pull the scrotum closer to the body, keeping them warmer, so it responds to cold. Other thing that's going to happen is what's called the dartus muscles. The dartus muscles are underneath the scrotum themselves, and therefore, again, when they respond to cold, they contract. So therefore, then in that case, now the scrotum will contract again, holding it close to the body. However, we have a problem, because as you understand, there has to be blood coming into the testes to give them nourishment and also to move the hormones out. You have a testicular artery coming in. Problem: the artery is pumping blood in at 37 degrees. But it can't be 37 degrees, again, because it's too warm and you can sterilize them. So once the artery comes in, it actually branches out into a very large spider web network of small little vessels called arterioles and venules. So the idea is the blood comes in and then quickly dilutes over a wider area, venting the temperature off, so therefore it doesn't overheat the testes. All that deals with keeping the temperature correct. Now, the testes, as I said, they're little oval-shaped areas. Left one hangs higher than the right one. Now, for this one, we're going to have to know some histology about this. All right, so here we go. There's the scrotum. There's the testis, one of them. Okay, it's like an oval-shaped body, all right? Now, if I were to take the testis, gentlemen, this hurts me to say this. I take your scrotum, I make a nick in it, and I pull your testis out, all right? All right, so anyway, I do that, and then what I'll now do is then I'll nick the testis and start pulling the tube out. The tube is called a seminiferous tubule. That's where he's able to do spermatogenesis. Please note, the testis does two jobs: production of testosterone and spermatogenesis, the creation of sperm. Now, if I were to take the testis and cut it straight down, what you would see is this. You would see a series of circle ovals like this all over the place. Okay? Each one of those tubes is called the seminiferous tubule. It's not a bunch of, it's one contiguous tube like spaghetti noodle going back and forth, but when you cut it down doing histology, it looks like more than one, okay? Now, the seminiferous tubules are where he's going to make his sperm. If you notice, though, in between these tubes, there's these small little areas in between here, okay? Those small areas in between the tubes, those are where you'll find the interstitial cells of Leydig. The Leydig cells. Those are the cells that secrete testosterone. Okay? So if I take one of these and blow it up, let me make this a little skinnier so I can put that here. One seminiferous tubule. Okay, so understand there'd be another one here, another one here. There'd be like this little area right there in between them, and that is the interstitial cells of Leydig. Leydig cells for testosterone. Now, for him, I'm not going to go over meiosis. I'm assuming you remember it from Gen Bio. All right, but you understand there's meiosis 1 and meiosis 2. All right, so follow. The male is going to start off with sperm stem cells, spermatogonia, also called Sertoli cells, also called sustenacular cells. Common name is Sertoli cells. Okay. Now, the Sertoli cells on each one of these seminiferous tubules are found on this outer ring all the way around. They tend to be larger, but they're the stem cells. Okay. Now, the Sertoli cells are going to be the stem cells for sperm, and then as I go through the hormonal cycle of the male, they're also going to be the source of a hormone called inhibin. Put that in the back of your brain. We'll come back to that in the middle. Okay, now, These are sperm stem cells. So they're going to go through mitosis. They're going to divide. Going to make two spermatogonia. One is going to differentiate to become sperm. The other one is held back as a reserve to maintain the pluripotency, the ability to continually divide to make more sperm, his entire existence. Okay, from onset of puberty till several hours after he's dead in some cases. Now, what happens? So think, I had spermatogonia. It goes through mitosis. Now I have two spermatogonia. Okay, one of them is going to get the call to differentiate. Once it differentiates, it becomes what is called a primary spermatid. Primary spermatid. No. Yeah, spermatid. Okay? Primary spermatid means now we go to the next layer on the inside. That primary spermatid is going to divide, and when it divides, it's going to create two secondary spermatids. Where are they? The next layer in, going toward the middle. I'm saying that wrong. It's not spermatid. Oh my god. Spermatocyte? Yeah, spermatocyte. Jesus, stupid. I'm dumb. Alright, so these is the primary spermatocyte, as I spit all over the board, and secondary spermatocyte, okay? Now, last thing, when you look at it, you'll see kind of like this empty cavity in the middle, okay? And what you'll see then is kind of like this little dot with this little thread coming on the inside. What are those all the way in the middle? Well, it's a tube, understand. Those are the spermatid. Those are immature sperm, which is why I was confusing the names. So the secondary spermatocytes will divide, and they will then make 4 spermatid. And they have these flagella. Now understand, spermatid means immature. They cannot swim, they cannot fertilize. The head of the sperm has to fully develop, and it can't swim just yet. The reason for that, I'll come up later whenever I talk about the anatomy of a sperm cell, because in it is going to be a pouch called an acrosome, which contains digestive enzymes in it. While it's in the male, it has a very, very thick cell membrane with cholesterol in it, making it very stiff, meaning that those digestive enzymes can't get out. Because if they get out, they are basically protein destroyers, and they would destroy his seminiferous tubules and all the areas leading out to the ejaculatory duct, effectively sterilizing him. Basically, it's like him having a grenade in him that you don't want to go off, prematurely, so to speak. All right, so with this now, this picture is what's going to be on canvas. So, again, best things to remember, can't stress this enough, understand what you're looking at will be seminiferous tubules, the areas in between the interstitial cells of Leydig. Interstitial cells of Leydig make testosterone, hence the name testis. Now, when we look at one of these tubes, the outside ring are the Sertoli cells, the stem cells. You go a little bit in, primary spermatocyte, go a little bit more in, secondary spermatocyte, then smack dab in the middle where you see the hole with the little eyelash wisps coming off of it, those are spermatid. Well, how do the spermatid move? Understand it's a tube. Fluid pressure goes through it. So as the spermatid bud off, they get deposited into the back of the testis. Okay? And then that's an area where they'll then stay, and then they'll mature prior to ejaculation. This area back here is going to be called the epididymis, or the epididymal duct. All right, so back to my notes. See where I left off, because I went rogue on you. Covered all that. That's good. Let's talk about then sperm anatomy. All right, I still got to leave room for the little guy over here, so to speak. All right, so here. Sperm cell. Okay. Now, sperm cell has three areas. We have the tail, the flagellum, which I'm sure you already remember back when we went over this. The flagellum is going to be made of microtubules. Specifically, the microtubules are in a 9+2 arrangement of protein. Again, what that means, 9 pairs of microtubules are on the periphery. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 1 pair in the middle. Okay. Then we have what's called the midpiece, also known as the neck. Wrapped around this is going to be mitochondria wrapped around it. The mitochondria are going to be what's going to give the energy, the ATP, for the flagellum to wag. Also, the flagellum has to be anchored down by 2 large centrioles. Therefore, whenever it moves, only one end moves like a dog's tail, and the whole thing doesn't wag back and forth. Most important part up here is going to be the head. The head is what houses the nucleus. Again, is haploid, 1/2 the DNA, 23 chromosomes. And then there's this bubble in front. That bubble in front is called the acrosome. In there's going to be two nasty enzymes. One is going to be called hyaluronidase, which destroys hyaluronic acid. The second one is called acrosin. Acrosin is basically a protein destroyer. Well, think, how does a sperm fertilize an egg? It has to hit the outside of it, release the enzymes, and literally chew a hole in the outside, then it'll insert then the head and the mid piece into it to fertilize. But it literally has to burrow its way into it. That's going to be done via the acrosome during fertilization. All right, eraser. So much for that. Again, we're still on the testis here. I think we're out of the testis now, finally. Or did I go over the hormones next? I go over hormones next. All right, so this part I'm going to go over. Can't stress it enough. Know it well. Okay, so the major players in the game. How does the male has a hormonal cycle just like a female has a hormonal cycle with sex hormones. All right, so major players of the game are going to be the pituitary gland in your brain, or his brain, the hypothalamus, this is the testis.
Sorry.
It's okay. Earthquake. You back up?
Yeah.
All right, so with that, all this is done by the grand orchestrator of the endocrine system called the hypothalamus. Okay, so understand, as the male is going throughout his daily life, his testosterone levels are starting to drop. Why? Because the tissues that need it are absorbing it, so therefore the levels drop. He has to make more. Okay, so think this through. As the blood is going up to the brain, the hypothalamus is seeing that there's lower and lower levels of testosterone in the blood. What does it do? It activates. So in response to low testosterone, the hypothalamus activates, and it creates a hormone, big star, called GnRH, gonadotropin-releasing hormone. GnRH goes right next door to the pituitary gland. Now, the pituitary gland is a little ball that has a front and a back surface. Okay, so there's a dorsal side to it and a ventral side to it in your brain. Well, sorry, anterior and posterior, I should say. So the GnRH is going to stimulate the anterior pituitary gland, the front part of it, to then release two hormones. One is going to be called, PTH, not PTH, oh wow, that's parathyroid hormone. No, I'm getting ahead of myself. It's going to release LH, luteinizing hormone, and for life of me, I'm having a brain fart. All right, FSH, okay. FSH is follicle stimulating hormone. So, low testosterone blood levels. The hypothalamus kicks in. It gives off GnRH. GnRH talks to the anterior pituitary gland, which will then give off LH, luteinizing hormone, and FSH, follicle stimulating hormone. They both are going to enter into his bloodstream. They're both heading to his testes, but they're going to two different locations. LH will bind to the Leydig cells, so it's simple. L to L. Leydig and luteinizing, okay? What does that do? That helps him to secrete more testosterone. So luteinizing hormone causes the Leydig cells to secrete testosterone. Great. Well, why did this all happen? He had lower testosterone, so you got to bring the levels back up. FSH, however, is going to bind to the Sertoli cells. They don't directly cause them to go to spermatogenesis to create sperm. What will happen? FSH will bind to the Sertoli cells. That will stimulate them to create a new receptor on the outside surface for androgens. Testosterone is an androgen. So what will happen? Testosterone levels increase. The new receptor on the Sertoli cells goes, oh, I can now understand what you're saying. Testosterone binds to it, and the cells start going through meiosis. So he starts making sperm. So follow. One stimulus, lower testosterone, two outcomes. Increased testosterone, Leydig cells, and eventually spermatogenesis from the Sertoli cells, the sustenacular cells. Okay? Now, this is now going to be a biofeedback mechanism. We now have two outcomes. Well, now we can only make testosterone so much, we can only create so much sperm. Somehow, some way, we got to loop back and shut this thing down. So follow. As his testosterone levels start to increase, what happens? The hypothalamus will pick it back up, going, oh, there's enough testosterone now, and will stop producing GnRH. That's one loop. Great. Second loop, which is what I was talking about, these sustenacular cells. Once they've gone through meiosis sufficiently enough, another hormone is given off by the sustenacular cells, the Sertoli cells. That's called inhibin. Inhibin will enter into his bloodstream and then shut down the anterior pituitary gland so there's no more FSH being released. Okay? Now, so understand it's called a double biofeedback loop. Know it well. Know the hormones. Know where they come from, where they go to, and what they cause to happen in the male anatomy. In my next lecture, when I go over the menstrual cycle, it's going to be the same hormones. Some of them do the same thing in the female. Some of them do drastically different things. So again, for the female, you got to know where they're coming from, where they're going, and what they cause to happen. All right, so that's the hormones. Let's now move on out of him, shall we? So from there then, as I said, let's go red. Okay, so in the back of the testis, there's a collecting funnel back here. This is called the ductus epididymis. So spermatid, whenever they're budding off, will collect here. The epididymis, you need to note, this is the epididymis, and this is the testis. The epididymis is an area where you store sperm prior to ejaculation. From there, then, this is going to create the vas deferens. The vas deferens goes up into the abdominal cavity and comes back down. As a landmark, there's the bladder, okay? So the bladder, understand, is then going to have the ureter coming in from the kidneys, and then you're going to have the urethra coming to the outside world to go number one, okay? Now, why do I do this? Why? Because this vas deferens is going to go up and go down on the outside of the bladder and then join into the shaft of the penis, right there, okay? Now follow, that's going to make a Y shape. So I got the urethra here, and then I got the vas deferens coming in. Where they meet, right there, that is called the ejaculatory duct. Okay. Also, on the outside of the bladder, there is a gland right here that also attaches at this union. That is called the seminal vesicle, the thing that creates the massive amount of volume to semen. Basically some buffers as well as a fructose solution, energy for the sperm to be able to swim. Now where they all come to a union, right there, that's the ejaculatory duct. We now have a problem. Understand, this pipe out of him, the urethra, is going to be used for two things, urination and ejaculation. However, the sperm cannot be at the same pH as the urine. So, gentlemen, when you approach ejaculation, let's just say you had to urinate. You couldn't urinate to save your life. Why? Because around this area right here is a gland called the prostate gland. It's like a muscular donut around it. When he becomes sexually aroused, it swells. What does it do? It pinches off the bladder from the urethra. It will then open up the ejaculatory duct, and therefore secretions from the seminal vesicle and then the sperm that are making their way down the vas deferens can mix and then be ejaculated out. Okay? So the prostate gland, understand, plays a very important role here because it prevents sperm and urine from mixing, which would then kill the sperm. Prostate gland also is going to give off other secretions, an alkaline solution to basically to neutralize the materials in the urethra itself. They also give off hormones which will actually induce muscular contractions called prostaglandins to help ejaculation. Now, here we would then have the base of the shaft of the penis and then the head of the penis, which we have an out diet. Okay, so we already said this area out here, that's called the glands. The shaft of the penis, though, if the male is to look down, there's a dorsal side and a ventral side. This dorsal side and ventral side are composed of what are called erectile tissue. Basically, the top side, you need to note, is called the corposa cavernosa. The bottom side is called the corposa spongiosum. Cavernosa spongiosum, holes. It's not muscle. Basically, they're blood vessels. How does this work? Well, when a man achieves an erection, or when he's sexually aroused, he releases nitrous oxide into these tissues. What this looks like is the arterioles coming into this area. There's an arteriole, a small artery, and there's two little venules on either side. When he's flaccid, the arteriole is not big. Nitrous oxide causes the arteriole to dilate. So what'll happen is the arteriole becomes big and pinches off the venules. What does that mean? Blood enters into the area but doesn't exit. That's an erection. All right. Now, another gland that's also going to be here, right here, is a small little gland that comes in right at the base of the shaft of the penis. Now keep in mind, gentlemen or ladies, understand that the part that you'd be able to see in his external anatomy would start roughly right about here. This is still inside of him. This part would be exposed to the outside world. This right here is called Cowper's gland, also known as the bulbourethral gland, the bulb next to the urethra. What is that going to do? That's an accessory gland that gives off a mucus-rich solution for basically for lubrication, plus it also gives off an alkaline solution as well. So understand that the seminal vesicle, Cowper's gland, and prostate gland are called accessory tissues. All right, so I ran through all those pretty quickly. Let's see. Note what the seminal vesicle does in the notes, that it gives off the alkaline solution. What does that do? It's there to basically neutralize the acid, neutralize the pH in the urethra so the sperm don't get damaged. I already went over the prostate gland, the bulbourethral gland. I said also gives off an alkaline solution. That's in a mucus-rich solution. Why does that one give it off? Because when this ejaculates into, say, a vaginal orifice or the uterus, the vagina's pH is about 1,000 times more acidic than the male. I love when they call it Hell's Cavern. And therefore, if you don't neutralize the acidity, the sperm are fried on contact once they are ejaculated into it. And understand that I gave you the diagram of this face on. I'm giving you the drawing of it to the side. You got to be familiar with both, okay? Now understand the parts that you have to know are stipulated in your manual. Know this, 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 and this. And I've gone through them all. So I'll see you for the female in a bit.